My name is Diane. I'm the owner of Tough Love Wellness. I am a travel medical massage therapist in South Florida and also a health coach. And recently, well, not recently, about a year ago, I got really sick from mold where I was living, and it completely turned my world upside down. So, through that process, it inspired me to write my first book, which I just released recently. And in that process, I started doing a lot of networking on social media and meeting other professionals in the mycotoxin industry. And that's how I met Jonathan. And I am so grateful that you were open to doing this because I've become so passionate about talking about something that I never would have pictured being a part of my journey. Because it's not, it's not aesthetic, but it's
Absolutely.
an ever-growing issue, and more people in my community have been asking about it. So I figured, what better way to spread awareness than to bring on, people who are on literally the forefront of it. And Jonathan not only does mold testing, but he also went for environmental law as well. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Um,
So I've always been into the environmental stuff. Um, Really, like, it started off with the bigger climate change and that whole air pollution thing. And I never thought I would end up in mold either. But one of my friends got me into this sort of indoor environmental crisis, epidemic, if you will. It's a global issue. And so I found that through my work, I can actually really help people heal, similar to, I'm sure, your protocols. Getting out of mold is super important, or at least getting proper remediation is super important to heal. So I really appreciate you having me. It's really great what you do, and obviously the massaging and all that as well is super important to keep people relaxed and calm.
yeah,
And a lot of people panic when they hear about mold, and that's counterproductive.
definitely. Yeah. I also specialize in manual lymphatic drainage, which is kind of better words like the body's garbage disposal. So when it comes to trying to detox from mold and other issues, that can be a really beneficial way to help speed up the process a little bit. Um, yeah, I'm excited. Um, well, okay, so I have like some questions to ask you, and um, feel free to chime in with anything. But I guess
Sure.
to start out, can you explain what a mold assessor is and does?
Yes, with pleasure. So in Florida, Florida is one of the few states that has a license for mold assessment.
Just
There's really only, I think, 4 states that even have mold laws, really. Hey to the detox doc, by the way. A mold assessor is someone who makes an assessment of the mold, obviously, as it sounds, but it's more than just mold testing. So I do have another, I have a TikTok page called Mold Testing, but I like the Mold Assessor page more because it's really more about the assessment than just a sample or a test or an air sample that someone does in your house or a petri dish or an ERMI test. It's more than that. It's really all about the moisture. A good mold assessor is looking for moisture problems in your home. Even if you don't see mold, you're going to find mold hidden when you have moisture problems a lot of the time. The main gist of it here in Florida is that the mold assessor should not be the person who's doing the remediation. I'm writing a remediation protocol based on my assessment, and we don't want, I don't want to do the remediation and write my own protocol. That's a conflict of interest. And there's Florida laws about that, which basically say if you're doing the mold assessment, you're not doing the remediation within a 1 year period. Um, so I'm obviously not an attorney yet, but I did go to law school. Like you mentioned, I have a law degree, and you know, if you're going to be doing mold work, you should definitely know what the law says. It's super important in Florida.
that makes sense. That's yeah. You were actually the one who taught me that not too long ago too, because I've gotten to know some other mold remediation companies as well. But I didn't. I mean, it makes total sense the conflict of interest, but I didn't realize it was actually law here, and I guess you can only hope that that will become more standard law too to help with that conflict of interest.
Yeah, definitely. I think Florida has a lot of interesting laws, and I think this is one of the better
I
ones
agree.
that's actually very helpful. And I think a lot of it is because of the predatory kind of industry, especially with the elder community. I mean, the amounts I could be, ripping these people off is crazy, but I don't do that. But there's even bad mold assessors who are charging just as much as me because of there's a predatory way that you can sell, mold stuff. I could tell people gut your whole house, you have to leave, but that's not really how it works. Every house is different, and you really don't want someone to come in and tell you, "Oh, I'll fix everything for you for 10 grand," but you didn't get an assessment from a third party. Maybe there's only 5 grand worth of work.
Right. Yeah, that definitely makes
Yeah.
sense. I think that people should know, even if they're outside of Florida, that's still something to consider. Absolutely.
Yeah, and even, there's some loopholes where like a GC, for example, a general contractor can do both, I think, in Florida. But even some of those that I work with who have that ability, they still send a third party assessor because it looks better on you if you're sending a third party to verify everything. So it's really a win-win, for
Mm-hmm.
everyone. Um, a lot of states they're doing both. They do the testing and the remediation, and it's tricky everywhere. Florida's a whole nother beast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Especially since we're so prone to like everything that just happened last week and a few weeks before that, even. Um, what are some of the common signs that people should look for in their homes, especially after a storm, that might indicate a mold problem?
sure. So I think the most important top number one sign is to look for symptoms because usually at that point, I mean, you've got an issue. If you've got some symptoms that are related to the building, when you feel better, when you leave, you feel better. When you're home, you feel worse. And thank you for the follow, by the way, Christine. But in the home, when you're looking around, like, what do? I don't have magical eyes that someone else doesn't have, but it's really knowing where to look, how to look. Visible mold, obviously, is a major concern. If you see something already that you're like, okay, there's black spots, this looks like mold more or less, that's usually kind of like a tip of the iceberg situation. If you see a little bit here on the wall, there's probably more behind the wall where it's even more humid. So you can't always see it. That's the unfortunate part. A lot of times, what you will see is water damage, or moisture damage, or condensation, or things are leaking, dripping. Things were just painted over, but they look like horrible. There's different scenarios. A new home is different from an old home. You would look for kind of different sort of things, but it's really water damage. Signs that they just covered a bunch of stuff up. Um, the smell of the home is usually a big part, but you will not always smell the mold. Maybe at certain times, on certain days, given certain moisture, but you really want to be looking for things that don't look right in general. And, you know, understanding, having education about how a building works, that's all part of it.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I travel like you do a lot, and I'm in so many places, businesses and homes, where, especially businesses, I'll see like the water damaged ceilings and things like that. And it's scary because, on one hand, if the business could just replace the tile and act like nothing's going on behind the surface, or, they leave it because it's a financial issue for tenants and landlords, the whole thing. Um, and it can just get so much worse. Um, and water damage was actually going to be the next thing I was going to mention too. But if, especially given that we just had the hurricane, but if someone thinks that they have mold, what would be your first like line of defense for them? Like, to immediately schedule a consult, or?
Yeah, well, the whole point of the consultations I do is really to get a starting place. Obviously, budget is always the number one thing, really, when it comes to getting stuff done. So it really depends on where you are budget wise. If you have $50 to spend versus 50 grand, then there's different. You can't remediate with $100. Um, you also can't plug in a dehumidifier or a drying fan or HEPAs without having power. So a lot of people right now don't have power. A lot of people right now are still flooding from the hurricane. So it's different for every case. So I would say book a consult with me or anyone who can guide you through your building related illness. Um, but water damage, is the main concern. Some people don't realize, but humidity in your air could be water damage. Condensation dripping from your AC could be water damage. Moisture can soak through concrete. It can soak through the floors. It really depends. The hurricane is like a whole nother crazy ball game. Not just one hurricane that was bad, but multiple bad hurricanes in a row. For Florida, Georgia, Carolinas. So that everyone has a different scenario with mold. Really, the best things are like reduce your exposure with HEPA filters. Dehumidifiers are helpful. If you really don't have power, it becomes much trickier. Um, at a certain point, fresh air outside is probably going to be better for you than your air inside. If there's mold everywhere, and I've seen, just from Hurricane Helene before Hurricane Milton, there was mold everywhere. Like these people were flooded, and they weren't even in the path of the storm necessarily. But it's always about dry environment and clean environment. So that's the best steps before you get a professional to come in and look at
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, but really, you almost don't want to mess with it at all, and you hardly even want to be there. Uh, but some people don't have, it's a budgetary thing.
That was me. I knew nothing about mold or remediation at the time. I had no proper PPE. Like, I don't think I even wore gloves when I was cleaning the place I was in. And it was just a downward spiral for months after that. And when you were talking about how sometimes you don't even smell it, I mean, I just recently discovered mold dogs because of you too, which is such a cool thing even exists. But one of my friends teases me that I'm basically my own mold dog these days because that's my least favorite side effect now is that I can go just about anywhere and smell it like a mile away. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I've actually said the same thing about myself, being like a mold dog, and
Yeah.
I use my nose and all my other senses as part of my assessment.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important. I try to teach the world how to kind of do mold assessment, and you really do have to use all your senses.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be your smell. Your smell could be affected from the mold anyway.
Right.
It's your ears, it's your touch, it's literally every sense, maybe not taste,
Mhm.
but um, some things you can't necessarily see or even hear or feel. So I there's a reason for paying more for a really good mold
Right.
assessment. That's how you end up with a really good remediation, a really good protocol. Um, and I tell people be careful doing it yourself or
Abs-
taking matters into your own hands, even if you have the same skill and experience as the best mold assessor, it doesn't mean you're going to find everything anyway. So, I can't find 100% of every mold colony in someone's house. I'm not opening up every wall, but there's general, like, there is things we can do like that to check behind walls. But it's always good to get a second opinion or a third opinion, if you can afford it. So don't, taking matters into your own hands. You have to have the PPE, like you said. And a lot of the worst exposures will happen during a DIY remediation or during a DIY cleanup,
Mhm.
or even something like just dusting your home. People don't realize mold can often look just like dust, or your regular dust could be very moldy because of the toxins and spores and DNA of the mold. So we do a lot of dust testing too, which is, you cannot just have an air test. The majority of the industry is just doing air testing. You cannot just have an air test. You need a moisture assessment. You need surface testing usually to prove mold and stuff like that.
That definitely makes sense. Other than like physical health issues, what would you say are the risks of leaving mold untreated?
Well, there's the physical, which is basically any symptom, like literally almost anything.
Mhm.
And then maybe, mental. There's a lot of mental stuff, which is, I'm sure, tied in with the physical, but there's the depression, there's the anxiety, there's the hallucinations. But a lot of that is, I mean, it's brain chemistry stuff. Um, Other than health and wellness stuff, I mean, there's damage to your property. Anytime you have mold or moisture, you're basically living in a compromised environment. maybe you have a roof leak, maybe you have a super moist AC system, ductwork. And in Florida, we see some of the worst of that. But I've seen just, really people who are very, very sick, like they look one step away from, moving on to the next dimension. They're
Right.
very sick, like falling apart. And everything else in your life kind of goes with that. If you're not functioning, everything kind of falls apart. Um, but there's, people ask me a lot, like, is there hope? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? And the answer is always yes. The more you learn every day, and we had to learn the hard way, everyone kind of has to learn the hard way usually to really learn something. Um, but there's always room for a cleaner, healthier environment and learning. And I think hopefully people will know what to look for if they see enough of, your videos, my videos, and this mold stuff. I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah. And hopefully take it seriously. I feel like that's one of the biggest issues
Yeah.
that people, oh, it's just a little bit. Oh, it's, like something in the shower, like it's normal, it's no big deal. And don't realize how it can completely change their life.
Yeah.
And
And
not
I think it's like you said, it's a big issue and it's very understudied. So I think a lot of this, there's such a big problem right now with immune deficiencies and cancer and the autism, and there's a lot of things that your environment could possibly affect. Studies are more than pointing to that. Um, they've been talking about this stuff since greenhouse gases, and we have pollution in our air and it's making people sick. Well, this mold is basically the same thing in your home, air pollution, surface pollution, but it's also toxic. It has mycotoxins. So it's very much like your indoor environment dictates your health and it dictates your motivation, your focus, like everything kind of ties in.
absolutely.
Mhm.
How do you plan on tying your legal background into like where do you want to take that going forward?
Well, that's a great question. So I've already started doing consulting. So that's it. It helps very much with that. Just having the legal degree. But I've been, I concentrated in environmental law when I went to law school. I did a clinic there where I was actually able to work with mold clients who are usually either renters or Section 8 or whatever it is. But it's very interesting. Like, I love the landlord tenant stuff, mostly to help tenants, but there's also the people who will try to take advantage of landlords on the flip side. So there's always, in law, there's always two sides of the coin. But I want people, I want justice and healthy people, around the world. So that's kind of the direction I'm going. But there's a lot of, people sue remediators for improper remediations, and there's all kinds of there's insurance claim stuff. There's a lot of legal stuff involved. Um, so I try to be a resource without giving people legal advice, but I'm
Sure.
always I'm always talking to get an attorney, get a medical doctor, at least to supervise.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense. Um, so, I mean, we know that not everyone has access to resources when it comes to mold. This is something I kind of touch on in the book a little bit too. But do you have any suggestions on how people in lower income or marginalized communities can get the help that they need?
yeah, definitely, and that it always comes back to the budget for sure. Um, it's hard to tell someone who has a low budget, hey, I think you should start with a consult. But that's kind of like before you make a decision that's educated, you have to learn. So, you know, spending, even like an $80 consult or something, that could save you hundreds to thousands just on the mold testing and assessment. Then you have a good assessment. Now you're saving tens of thousands probably on a remediation. So it's really good to have the foundational knowledge. I would say speak with someone who knows what they're doing, at
Right.
least at least for free. Like call some AC guys out, call some mold guys out, and maybe they give you some kind of estimate. But it depends, like I said, on your finance. So if you have $50, like that's some people, that's all they have. Some people don't have that.
Right.
But it's tricky. What's your situation? Are you a renter or are you a buyer? There's a lot that goes in, but I think every day counts when it comes to reducing your
Yeah.
exposure. and that helps you think clearer and gives you more energy, because when you're reducing mold exposure, your body can thrive better, your brain can work better. So I'm really big on reducing exposure, which, you tell someone buy a HEPA air filter. I think that's a great idea, but those could be a little more expensive. So then you want to talk about, maybe we can get you a box fan, which is like 20, $30, attach an AC filter to the back of the box fan, tape it on, create your own air filter.
Right.
That's like a $50 option. And it's not a HEPA
Right.
filter, but it will help you clean, and, reducing exposure, I think, is key to making the next decision. But knowing how to reduce exposure, that's kind of the hard part.
Yeah. That
Which
def-
I really focused on clean air and clean surfaces. Those are the two things that make a place clean. And then dryness is super important. Really, the dehumidifier, like at a minimum, if people can't afford a huge remediation, they should have a dehumidifier. They should have HEPA filters. And you really want to have both, because you don't want to have a humid environment where you're running a HEPA and then now you get mold spores in your HEPA, and then the humidity can actually allow for growth.
yeah.
So humidity is really the number one enemy, especially in Florida.
Yeah, that's what happened to me where I was living. The AC broke, and then by the time we had it replaced, Florida summers, it got to like 97 degrees in the bedroom and like 70% humidity. And, by the time I even started to get sick or realized it, it was already too late. So,
Yeah, it's Florida we have our hands full even before these hurricanes with the mold. Having a humid attic above your head with ductwork in it, the AC units probably in the garage or in the attic. These are recipes for, as we call them, microbial disasters. It's really bad in Florida. And I tell people, some people go to Arizona, and it really depends on what you're dealing with, but this is a humid environment. This is a moldy environment. When you're outside in Florida, you are breathing mold spores a lot more than most people want to know. When you're outside, this is microscopic stuff,
right.
but it could affect you. You could get a headache. You could get toxicity. Just as much as indoor mold can affect you, outdoor mold can affect you too.
That's really,
Um, yeah, and in reality, there's no such thing as indoor mold. Like, it's just mold. Your house is barely even indoors in the first place, but some molds will do better in that indoor environment. But they're also, a lot of this comes from outside. This is where the spores are coming from.
wow.
So it's definitely, and someone commented here about Hurricane Helene, not treating us much better than Milton. There was, before Hurricane Helene and Milton, there was Beryl. I think we've had 12 storms in 5 years. So it is a moldy, these people who are probably going to come buy all these properties now, they're going to have moldy properties, for a long time. So,
Yep. I live, we're still recovering from Ian 2 years ago. And, now just set everybody for their back. And some people, like, their flood insurance denied them, just so many things. It's really unfortunate. But, I understand we can't change all of it. So I'm just trying to help, just like just trying to help people where we can. And do you help people outside of Florida also?
yes, I've done mold assessment in other states. I've been fortunate to consult with people all over the world. There's mold industries in Malaysia that I've spoken to, and I've spoken with people in Greece and all around the world, thanks to social media, mainly. Um, but it's crazy because there's, every place has a different level of understanding of mold. And I was talking with someone in Malaysia, and they're talking to me about how they have like a spiritual view of their home, and they do things differently because of their culture, so it's interesting. But I do travel, um, for mold assessment as well. It tends to be like in another state, somewhere from like the $5,000 to $10,000 range
Gotcha.
to travel, get the equipment out. So it's, we can't help everyone, unfortunately, but that's why I try to post a lot of content so that I could show people, not only in these bigger places, but even the renters and the little places. That's why I try to do these lives and spread the word. And I'm glad you're doing the book and all the social media. It's really the number one way of helping people. Even
Yeah,
if you could help everyone from the hurricane, which I want to do, I want to go out there myself. Um, there's still billions of more people that
yeah.
need help. So there's a lot of ways to help people.
That's
Um,
and speaking of, if someone's watching this and they think they might have mold in their home, how can they reach out to you?
well, I am mold assessor on Instagram. I am mold testing on TikTok. My info is all in my account. Um, and there's mold testing live at outlook.com is my email. So my company is called Mold Testing Live, which all basically started with these live streams over on TikTok. But pretty easy to reach at mold assessor at mold testing. Should be able to find me.
And do you like if someone's in another state, do you like network with other remediators or any other companies where you can help them find help in their area?
Yes. So through my consultation, I try to be help with everything from step A to Z until you're feeling better, until you're comfortable living in your environment. Like I'm there the whole way. That could be 10 different consults,
Yeah.
but it really depends how effective and how we do it. But a big part of what I do is vetting, interviewing local remediators, mold teams, um, because you have if you really want the pros, you got people like traveling out,
Mhm.
and that can cost. They charge you just to travel, and then the remediation could be 50 grand, or um, but even when people are hiring mold assessors like me, I will talk to them and be like, okay, let's just see your process and see if you're a good fit for the client. They don't always love to hear my perspective a lot of the time. The mold industry is a lot of them are set in their ways from the past few decades.
Right.
So, speaking of, calling it, I love how you call it the mycotoxin industry because it's more focused on that now. And even further than that, um, further than mycotoxins is the VOCs that these molds can produce. So, as living organisms, there's actually chemicals they can create that are stronger than formaldehyde, and these are not really tested for. There is mold VOC test that you can do, or microbial VOC, which is VOC is a volatile organic compound, basically something that can evaporate into the air. But you don't want to have, it comes back to it's not just mold testing, it's mold assessment. So
Yeah,
that's why I am mold assessor.
that makes total
Yep.
sense. And I appreciate the VOCs because I used a ozone machine when I was trying to do the DIY, and but where I was old RV, and it ended up making everything so much worse. Um,
Yeah.
it,
That's an interesting one. Yeah, it's a big point. Ozone is a poisonous gas, I think, if you will, as is, oxygen, and you don't want to OD on the elements, but people use a lot of different tactics in general before you learn to try and fight and prevent mold. But a lot of them are the ozones, or hey, I have this UV light in my system, there's no way that there could be mold. I hear these all the time. Even if you have a really good HEPA and a really good dehumidifier, and you have maybe even a high tech like a purifier, all that, you're still not going to really heal until you find out what's going on in the property. So the ozone, maybe it could be helpful, maybe harmful, but if there's still mold, you're definitely going to be like going in circles.
yeah, absolutely. Especially that's what's crazy to me. Anyone can buy an ozone machine off Amazon, like no instructions.
Yeah, it's crazy what you can buy these days. And they're selling this stuff like any kid could walk in and buy, like insane things. But even the pots and pans you buy at the store are like toxin. I mean, everything is.
Started.
I want to get, yeah, we can have another live on cutlery, I'm sure, but everything is kind of toxic, unless you're really off the grid and you can control your soil, your air, your water.
Mm,
But I tell people, no matter where you are, you have to control that indoor environment. So
right.
you do want to have a dehumidifier, you do want to have a HEPA. Your AC is supposed to do that, but it's probably not going to dehumidify and filter your air to the healthy level.
Wow. Those are great
Yeah.
points.
Yeah, and a lot of time that AC in the ductwork is actually the cause of so many health problems. The AC in ductwork, especially in Florida, is such a wet disaster. So I really hope people look into that, in their homes.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Is there anything else in particular you would like people to know before we kind of wrap things up?
Um, no, I just well maybe, I think as far as the mold assessment and even this, the health related stuff, get checked up once a year or twice, dare I say twice a year. Someone to look in your home. Get someone to check out your body and your lymphs and get a nice massage too, which I highly, obviously recommend. Um, because, that brings me back to, I don't know if you saw, we did a live yesterday and we were talking about a Facebook post that I saw in a very big Facebook group for mold, which I won't name, but they actually basically the comment said you should panic. Panic is the only way to, you know, panic is the only motivation. And in some cases, maybe, but in reality, if you, let's say you're in uh, I mean, you don't want panic to make a decision.
Right.
If you're in the military or you got to make a big call, you don't want to panic. You want to focus on your health. If you're in a hurricane and there's a huge flood coming, you don't want to panic. I mean, at that point, maybe you should, but it's really like, okay, what do I grab and how do I get to safety? Like, let's think clearly. Um, so get mold assessment more often, get peace of mind, think clearly, learn as much as you can, and that's how you avoid panic. I think I'm sure that panic is basically like a disease in your body. This fight or flight mode can really mess you up. And you posted about the hurricane fatigue, which I think we haven't even seen a lot of the hurricane stuff yet because it's still happening.
Right.
But the stuff that I saw today was just, I mean, Helene up in the Carolinas, the Blue Ridge Parkway is like
Yeah.
broken.
Yeah.
It's bad. So last piece of advice is evacuate if something is coming, even if it's like a maybe near miss. If you have the resources
Yeah.
to evacuate, I would 100%. We were a near miss down here in South Florida. I think you were a little closer on the southwest, but we had mega EF3 tornadoes,
Yeah.
which were basically, I think they were pushing like EF4, like they were getting pretty, but these are mega tornadoes, supercell. So you don't want to be near a big storm. Uh, the tropics come with tropical storms.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. I think this is really beneficial for anyone, especially those dealing with post-storm damage. But for anybody watching, if you are concerned about mold, definitely reach out to Jonathan. And we'll end up putting his contact info in the caption below this when we post it. But definitely get in touch. And if you're local to South Florida and you're interested in learning more about lymphatic massage or anything I've covered in the recent ebook, feel free to reach out. And yeah, this has been awesome. I really appreciate your time today, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate on other things like this in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to, and thank you for having me. I think the book is amazing. I think what you do is so helpful and amazing. Have you traveled much for the massage?
So I go pretty much all over Southwest Florida from like Cape Coral to Marco, and then I go from like Palm Beach to Miami.
Yeah, I think some people could definitely use a massage right now, especially after that
Yeah,
hurricane. It's crazy, but thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to more and keep posting content, keep going live, and
appreciate it.
a lot of help is needed. But thank you so much, Diane. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'll talk to you
Have a
later.
great one. All right, bye.